ado, allow me to introduce Tristan Husby and Greek problems addressing autonomy. It's our next panel.
So this panel is entitled The Problems of Autonomy in Greek Thought. Our last panel was titled Theorizing the American Experience. The juxtaposition of these two panels is testimony to the breadth of this conference. Our first paper is entitled Metal Masters, Metal Slaves, The Cost of Artificial Intelligence in Greek Myth by Emma M. Griffiths. Dr. Emma M. Griffiths is a graduate of the University of Oxford and the University of Bristol. She has published on many aspects of Greek drama and myth, recently completing a monograph on child figures in Greek tragedy. She is currently working on a monograph exploring the use of mythological objects in the plays of Menander. Please welcome Dr. Griffiths.
Well, first of all, my thanks to the organisers for doing such a wonderful job, putting together such a great programme. I'm very happy to be here. Now, ancient studies about slavery, and particularly Aristotle's formulations, have for a long time been the benchmark against which historiography, later scholarship about slavery in different periods has applied itself. And this is extremely problematic. Even though we've had generations of scholars now looking at Aristotle in detail and showing how complex his ideas on slavery are, and how what we might think of as legal and economic frames are actually more complex socio-cultural entities, there is still a lot of emphasis in modern scholarship on referring back to Aristotle's theory, Aristotle's ideas on natural slavery and so on. So the sort of thing that we frequently get, this is Nyquist in a very good book from 2013, but summarising Aristotle argues at one and the same time the categorical naturalness of household slavery and the unnaturalness for Greeks of despotism in the political sphere. Well, as a generality, you could work with that, but I really wouldn't want you to use that as any sort of basis to base later analyses on. When we summarise ancient views or Aristotle's views like this, we run some fairly serious risks. One is that we do a disservice to the ancient world and our understanding of that. We are selective in what we look at. We look for an overarching theory where perhaps there isn't one. And by flattening the evidence, we ignore things that perhaps could be more useful. And the history of ancient slavery is horribly lacunose. Everybody who's worked on it would agree, even though we're moving towards a much broader idea of what was going on now than perhaps the just legal emphasis of previous scholarship. So that is one of the risks of this approach. The other risk I would suggest is in fact more serious. That if you start with the idea that there was a neat formulation that you could pin down, this is what the ancient world was like, it becomes easier then to use that to support later analyses, formulations, slavery, and ultimately you use these ancient ideas to manipulate the present. And for me, studying the ancient world has to be about what is it doing to us here and now. And so even though I'm going to be talking about Greek concepts, Greek myth, for me ultimately this is to do with modern debates about artificial intelligence and slavery, and how the language that we're using ultimately runs the risk of devaluing the human. So, Aristotle then. Many of you will know the famous quotation that the slave is a tool with a soul. Slave is a live article of property. But in this same passage, Aristotle goes on to talk about myth. He is not giving you a legal economic definition. He says that if every tool could perform its own work when ordered, this would be have various advantages. Like the statues of Daedalus in the story, so telling you this is about a myth, or the tripods of Hephaestus, which the poet says, again this is Homer, epic poetry, these tripods moved the company divine. So even when Aristotle is making this very famous statement, he is giving you some very odd little bits of mythological detail. Now, Daedalus, famous as the father of Icarus. They have these homemade wings, supposedly taking them up to escape from the labyrinth. Icarus flies too high, falls to his death. This is probably Icarus, may actually be Hypnos. This is actually the Met. I spent a very hot afternoon there this week trying to track this down and have a good look at it. And I've actually got some slightly better images to show you if anybody wants to see it. Anyway, that's Icarus, son of Daedalus. Daedalus in Greek myth has lots of different things going on. He makes various inventions. He also makes these statues that are supposed to be able to move. And that is the point that I'm going to be looking at today. The myth of Daedalus is referred to in lots of philosophical texts, some of which are to do with slavery. And because of that, some scholars have taken the Daedalus image and run with it. So Ismard, earlier this year, in a very interesting book about democracy and power in the Greek world, says Daedalus thus became the emblem for the evil the democratic system does to those in possession of knowledge in its refusal to recognise their political superiority. Now, for me, that is a step too far. That is taking an ancient myth and almost using it now as a modern myth to talk about something else. So what I want to show you today is just one other little piece of evidence about Daedalus and a runaway slave that doesn't quite fit with this formulation that Ismard gives, but does suggest that there is a cultural nexus surrounding slavery in the ancient world, which is tied up with myth, religion, the magical qualities of metal. So, start with a bit of Plato, look at a passage on the Meno, and then finally I'll just give you a few suggestions to where I think we might want to reflect on the later implications. So, Plato's Meno, the passage that I'm referring to is in detail on your handout if you want to have a look at it. This is one of the classic Platonic dialogues where Socrates is having a conversation with an interlocutor. Here they're talking about the difference between knowledge and true opinion. There's a lot of comedy in this passage, so we have to bear that in mind if we're thinking of this as socio-historical evidence. But Socrates makes a very strange swerve in his argument. Meno is confused, and Socrates says, well, why do you think it is that you're confused about this? And he said, it's because you have not observed with attention the images of Daedalus. What? Meno is really taken aback by this. And then we get another little bit of comedy. This is a dig at Meno, being from Thessaly, where they're not very sophisticated. Perhaps there are none in your country. So these are supposedly the mythological statues made by a human, albeit mythological, but still a human artificer. And Socrates is now talking about them as though they are some sort of real object. So there's a lot of strange sort of conceptual framing going on here. That's how he starts. And then we get on to the slavery issue. Meno says, well, why should I be thinking about statues that move when we're supposed to be talking about knowledge? And Socrates says, well, the point is, to have true knowledge about something, to say you genuinely understand it, you have to have it pinned down, tied down. Otherwise, knowledge is like these sculptures, these statues. If they're not fastened up, they play truant and they run away. But if fastened, they stay where they are. And he then goes on to make explicit that the comparison is making the slave related to the statue, which is then related to knowledge. So it's a three-stage image he's presenting. I think it's meant to be comic. I think it is meant to be confusing. But that doesn't mean it's not interesting for us. Because Socrates says, to possess one of his works, this is one of these magical moving statues, which is let loose, does not count for much in value. It will not stay with you any more than a runaway slave. But when fastened up, it's worth a great deal for his productions of very fine things. Now, If you're interested in issues of value in ancient culture, this passage alone is worth learning Greek for. Because the vocabulary here is so densely packed with complex and sometimes contradictory ideas about what is value. What is the value of a slave when you've got it? How do you buy a slave? When a slave runs away, ultimately, is he stealing himself? This is one of the problems in the ancient world. But for today, I just want to draw out a couple of the threads related to this runaway slave in relation to these metal statues. When we hear things about ancient statues, we tend today to think of nice marble, white classical images. But of course, for the Greeks, that wasn't the case. They were more often thinking about bronze, metal statues that do look quite lifelike. This is the Artemisian bronze, sometimes said to be Zeus, sometimes said to be Poseidon. And that's one of the Riachi warriors. You can see here that there is more of an effort at naturalism. The emphasis on movement is very important in Greek art, that you want it to look as though the character is just about to take off. So it's not complicated to see that there could be a myth about real sculptures coming to life. But what does that have to do with runaway slaves? Well, ideas about creating things, the magical powers of metal, are closely tied in Greek thought to ideas about what we today would think of as human rights, about morality, about what it is to be a human being. I'm just going to show you two tiny little fragments to support this. One is from Euripides' tragedy, The Medea, where the heroine is lamenting the fact that we cannot see people's character. O Zeus, why then, when there's a clear method for telling counterfeit coin from the real, is there no surefire mark of evil on a man's body which would tell you of his character? We see this sort of comment several times in tragedy, the idea that metal is perhaps better, more trustworthy. And then the contrary one, where the slavery is coming back in. This is from Euripides' Heracles. Next, you disparage that clever invention, an archer's weapon. A man who fights in line is a slave to his weapons. And that is very explicitly using the language of slavery. The Greek says, a man, hoplite, is the Greek warrior, slave is of weapons. And this is about the fact that you're in a hoplite line, but it's also to do with the fact that you're giving over power to the metal object. So I think anytime you're starting to think about metal and slavery, you are tapping into a discourse about value, about what it is to be a human being, to be an individual. One final little bit of evidence to suggest to you that the Greeks were thinking like that as well. This is an image from a Greek kylix, a drinking cup. It's called the name vase of the foundry painter, 5th century Attic cup. And this shows a workshop where one of those bronze statues is being created. Lots of things of interest here. One of them is that the figures who are holding it together, who are being shown in a much smaller perspective, they're not children, they're adults because they've got beards on, but they're slaves. So we've got something here about the creation of characters and the value of human beings, even in one image. Under the handle, we then have this, which has provoked a certain amount of debate about, is it part of an ensemble where the head is waiting to be put on? Is the figure being melted down and repurposed? Which takes you into ideas of, if you have a metal slave, could he actually chop off his arm, melt it down, turn it into coin, and buy his own freedom? See, Greek mythological thinking allows you to do these sort of strange double things. Okay, so what does this really have to do with slavery? I would suggest we can put some of the ideas together like this. On the grand scale, Daedalus' moving statues remind us of the importance of myth, history, religion for the Greeks. There's also the potential for comedy, that we shouldn't be always thinking, Aristotle's theory of natural slavery, that it's all totally serious. In fact, there's a lot of humour in Greek images to do with slaves. And then there's also the question of the control of slaves, the use of physical ties. Do you tie them down? What is the role of slave collars? We've got contradictory evidence for this. Moving on. For me, the more interesting questions are on the other side. One is about the creation of value. Do you think of slaves as the capital outlay, that you bought them? Or do you think they have potential value, that they have earning power, and so on? Then there's the idea of how you create slaves. A slave who is born in the house, is that something you as the master have created? Can you own a human being from birth? Don't know. And then that goes on to the idea of motion and sentience. Is a sentient being always going to want to run away? Well, on one reading of the Plato passage, you would say yes. But I think there are other possible considerations. Should we say that sentience means a desire for freedom? Should we say that metal statues are showing natural reactions? Should we assume that slaves have natural reactions? So we're sort of coming back round to some of Aristotle's thoughts about natural slavery. For me, the interesting thing about this work at the moment is how this taps into ideas about the language of artificial intelligence today. Because there's a lot of interesting work happening on artificial intelligence, which is, I think, misreading some earlier scholarship, particularly about the ancient world. I just want to close by giving you one example of that. This is from an interesting book about the concept of artificial intelligence, human rights, what does it mean when we create figures, when we talk about slaving computers to others. And Kirky, in a very interesting piece, says this little bit about slaveholding societies, commonly held slaves and so on, quoting Professor Patterson from 1982. And just the fact that it is quoting from such an earlier piece of scholarship on the ancient world and about the historiography of scholarship, I find it is quite surprising. Now, I think that it's true that these problems about whether you know about jurisprudence, whether you know about law, how you define legal personality, I think those are still current issues. But the fact that artificial intelligence debates are drawing upon ancient and then more recent histories of slavery, I think for me is one reason why we need to focus on getting the ancient evidence out there, getting it explored in as much detail as possible. So, final thoughts to take away from this. And I'm very open to take perspectives on this. I'm essentially a Greek literature person, so I'm here in disguise today. I would emphasise the importance of looking at myth, language, and crucially translation when we're looking at different cultures. Not just when we're looking at other languages, but when we're looking at languages from 100 years ago, 200 years ago. There's a temptation to think, particularly those of us who are English-speaking scholars at the beginning, that we can sort of read these texts from 100 to 200 years ago. I think sometimes we can't. Then there's the importance of materials. For the Greeks, I would say metal is an almost magical thing. So when you start making a slave out of metal, and you start thinking about slaves and metal, you set off all sorts of different conversations. For us, what do you make your robots out of? Would be one of the questions. Then there are these issues about creation, magical, religious, humanist, and of course, the dangers of simplifying comparanda. So the last thing I want to show you, again, is this vase. You've got, we assume, patrons, maybe people who paid for this sculpture. We've got a sculpture being created and being finished off. And yet the characters doing the actual work are generally assumed to be slaves because they are hierarchically shown as smaller. So there's something here about vision as well, about what you actually see when you look at ancient slavery. And that is all I've got today. I'm very interested to see where you'd like to go with this. Thank you. I was just about in 15 minutes.
So following our precedent from the earlier panels, we're going to take questions after both speakers have gone. So now I'm going to introduce Hedwig von, Aschenheim. Sorry, I'm going to butcher your last name. Aaron. Good. She received her PhD at Stockholm University in 2011 with a dissertation entitled Greek Incubation Rituals in Classical and Hellenistic Times, published with that same title as a Kerno supplement in 2015. She is currently a postdoc at Uppsala University, Sweden, and has continued her work on Greek religion. Please welcome her.
So first I would like to really thank the organizers of this conference. So as you just heard, I'm a postdoc at Uppsala University in Sweden, and I will give a brief presentation of ancient Greek slave festivals. That is, festivals where slaves could act as masters, and I will try and expand on why the ancient societies instituted them. As this is a work in progress and part of a project that I will hopefully begin to work on next year, I will be very grateful for any comments. So, as in much of Greek history, the texts of the early historians come down to us from quotes by later authors. Beginning with Sparta, and there you have Sparta. This state's economy was based on forcing what was probably the conquered indigenous population called Helots to cultivate the land. These Helots have been labeled both as slaves and as serfs in previous research. However categorized, they could not leave the land on which they worked, and to quote the 7th century poet Tyros, they, like donkeys under great burdens, they exhaustedly bring to their masters, obedient to harsh duress, half the fruits of the soil. And the Spartans, they waged annual war on them to deter them from uprising, but they rebelled repeatedly, and eventually, at least the Messenians got to be free after 500 years, around 370 BC. And the main Spartan religious festival was the Hyakintia, celebrated in honor of the hero Hyacinthus, a Spartan hero, whose death was mourned in the first part of the several days-long festival, and whose subsequent apotheosis was celebrated in the second half. All of Spartan society took part, and giving open expressions of mourning in the first part was obligatory, and here you have the quote on the first part of the festival. A good comparison for this part of the festival may be the public mourning of dead Spartan kings, where the Helots had to participate and to pretend to mourn the very person responsible for the institution of their enslavement. And here the ritual plays very much on emotional intensity of the participants, and it's highly ritualized and prescribed emotion that is to be displayed. The Helots, they cannot decide themselves what they are to feel and openly express here. In the second part of the festival, however, the city was swarmed with celebration of all sorts, including a part where all Helots were served a banquet by their masters. And here you have it to quote Plutarch, quoting an earlier historian. And the whole city is full of movement and the pleasure of the festival. They also sacrifice a large number of animals on this day, and the citizens offer dinner to everyone they know as well as to their own slaves. No one misses the celebration, and the city empties out to attend the show. So, knowing the Spartan habit of forcing their slaves to get utterly drunk and to be put on display during their banquets to exhibit the inferiority of the slaves, this particular dissolving of social bonds at the Hyakintia seems, at least in my eyes, unlikely to have been made in the spirit of togetherness. In all probability, it meant that the slaves were given a banquet of their own in Sparta, a ritualized event, just like the mourning of the dead Spartan kings. So moving on, in the nearby allied city of Troezen, you have Crete, because we're going to talk about Crete also, but Troezen is the sort of the big area there. There is a similar festival where the masters. I'm sorry, you have to trust me on the on the Troezen quote. There the masters they played knucklebones, a sort of a dice game with the slaves, and they also served them a meal. And then we have the Cretan quotes. We have slave festivals also on Crete, and here you have different sorts of slaves. You have first slaves that are have been taken in war and set to work the land. They call the Alfamiotai. And second, you have domestic or urban slaves, Chrysonetai. And it seems that in the city of Caledonia, slaves, they were allowed to take charge of the city totally during one day of the year. And certain festivals in Caledonia are considered theirs. Free people do not enter the city during them, and the slaves control everything and even have the authority to whip free individuals. And then you have the Hermaia festival on Crete. And this one seems more similar to what I explained happened in Troyes, but I did not have the quote there, where slaves are served a meal by their masters. And then moving on to Thessaly, you see in red, the landscape there in red. There you had another group of slaves who were in many aspects similar to the Helots, and they were called Penestae. And the Penestae of Thessaly were an indigenous population in Thessaly, and they were forced to work the land by the newcomers. They also rebelled repeatedly against their masters and gained independence at about the same time as the Helots. And the New Year's festival of in Thessaly is described in this way. They make the festival so hospitable that they welcome all visitors to the meal and release their prisoners, and they have their domestic slaves lie down and then serve them a feast, during which the slaves may say anything they like, and the masters do all the serving. So the Penestae, they were the property of their masters, whereas the Helots were the property of the Spartan state. There is a difference here. Thessaly was more like a clan-ruled society, and Sparta had more like a police state, you might say. On Crete, you have slaves who were distributed by lot, and they seem to have been owned by different landholders. And nonetheless, all of these systems demonstrate that the agricultural economy in these places depended on slave labor. And just like in the American South, a large enslaved population lived in separate lodgings or separate villages in the countryside and were responsible for the conservation of the land and the whole economy, really. In above all, the work of Henk Vassnell, Transition and Reversal, the Greek slave festivals have been seen as festivals of reversal compared to similar festivals where categories in society are turned about, serving much like carnival traditions in medieval Europe, so to speak, to let steam off of those oppressed. An important difference between the carnival traditions and the Greek festivals of the Doric states is that the Greek festivals, unlike the carnivals, were created and enacted by the authorities of those societies. It would be very tempting to compare the Doric slave festivals with, for instance, the Christmas holiday as described by Frederick Douglass here. But there are some significant differences. And here he's very clear on that these festivals work to, they have the very purpose of letting steam off, to make life bearable for the rest of the year. So in Sparta and the Doric states of Greek archaic times, what does it mean to serve a meal? I think this is the very fundamental function, the core of this type of a festival in at least the archaic societies. The meaning of serving slaves a meal is best explained in the context of these cities that instituted them. Sparta and the Cretan cities consisted of so-called Doric tribes. In these city-states, all citizens were obliged to eat together in daily public meals, called syssitia. And these meals demonstrated the equality between the citizens, as all got the same part of the food served, but at the same time it made it very obvious which groups did not have a say in society, as women, slaves, and foreigners. So the primary function of the ritualized serving of a meal in these old historic festivals, such as the Yechitia, would in my eyes not be the general inclusiveness of the spirit of the festival, but rather complete and public reversal of the social order. In the later Roman Saturnalia, according to Roman historians, a decidedly Greek festival, there was a public banquet for all. So I'll switch. Oh, sorry. The Saturnalia, anyways. I had a picture of the Saturnalia, but here in the Saturnalia, slaves, they dined, you had a merry time, you had holidays, you didn't have to work. But the evidence on masters serving a meal is not really conclusive. They could be dining together, there could be separate dining, they could be dining but the slaves dined first. But there is not really the ritualized serving of a meal. as you have in the Akintia or in the Cretan festivals. The important thing in the Saturnalia was really that there was plenty of food and drink and different sorts of games were allowed. Thus, the meal showing a reversal of roles did not bear the same ritual significance as in the Doric states of archaic and classical time. The common factor of the Doric festivals is that slaves are served a meal at the table by their masters. This is a complete reversal of the syssitia, the public meal of all free men. Saturnalia, in fact, resembles more to a general holiday for all. And the Saturnalia is probably much better to, you can definitely compare it with the Christmas holidays described by Frederick Douglass. So it just might be that the festivals are reversal and general holidays for all, including slaves, were not one and the same thing from the start. And then we come to an enlightening quote on why slaves were allowed holidays are the words of the Greek historian Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who lived in the 2nd century AD. And here he's writing about the Compitalia, which is similar to the Saturnalia festival. In order that the slaves, being softened by this instance of humanity, which has something great and solemn about it, may make themselves more agreeable to their masters and be less sensible to the severity of their condition. In other words, very much like the Christmas celebration described by Frederick Douglass, holidays were allowed to make the enslaved cope psychologically with the rest of the year. Thus, there is a clear understanding among the owners of the slaves of the unspeakable strain, hardship, and inhumane conditions that they have put the enslaved under. Interestingly, the modern psychological general strain theory, or GST, might be applied to understand how the enslaved coped with the strain of slavery. The theory separates behavioral, cognitive, and emotional responses to the strain. And the first behavioral response is, of course, escape. It might be illustrated by this example from the 5th century historian Thucydides, who writes about a long war between Greece's superpowers at that time, Athens and Sparta, describing how the Athenians suffered. And of course, somebody else did not suffer, they got to escape. And the second behavioral response might be revolt. As we have learned, the Helots and the Penesta revolted until they got to be free. And others were maybe not as successful, but this risk was something that the slave owners always took into account. And here is Aristotle on different strategies to not to make your slaves revolt. And we will skip this one actually. But there is a Roman law that actually prohibits slaves to commit suicide as they are the property of the masters. There is evidence on this, but this is not like a coping strategy. But still, these are things that happen because of the strain of slavery. And manumission is a very clear cognitive, I would say, if you use the general strain theory, a cognitive response which would entail some kind of a rational strategy to improve your situation. If you are given the possibility to buy your freedom, of course, you will work harder and try to achieve that goal. And Deborah King will talk more about manumission inscriptions later on. And as for emotional coping, you had very strong family ties, which you can see in so many gravestone inscriptions of freed people from both Greek and Roman times. No doubt also humor and satire was a coping strategy, an emotional coping strategy. For instance, you have the story about the runaway slave Trimarchos, who established a small rule of his own on Chios, which was a big slave trade center in the Greek world. And he was eventually made to become a hero and received hero cult from Chios. So, where do the slave festivals end up according to the general strain theory, if you use that? For sure, as the quote of Dionysius of Halicarnassus suggests, they would entail some sort of emotional coping, as being treated as a human at times, may serve to ease the pains of psychological repression. I think that the so-called slave festivals developed during many hundreds of years. So the strict reversal of roles, as seen in the Spartan festivals, was probably not helping with emotional coping on behalf of the slaves. The Roman Saturnalia for certain filled that function. The ritual meals served the slaves in the Doric communities, and above all Sparta, may have served for the master's need of coping, strict religious and ritual temporary reversal of an inhumane social construction may have served to deconstruct and reconstitute their social structure, giving room to vent out doubts, bad conscience, and also fear of a reversal of fortune to end up on the other side, so to speak. Thank you.
And we can now take some questions for both papers. I see Jesse.
Thank you for your presentations.
Nice and loud.
Oh, thank you for your presentations. It was wonderful. So my question is about, sorry, I'm trying to word my question first of all, but when you were talking about reading ancient treatments of slavery and how they are read often too seriously, and how sometimes there is a humorous bent to them, I'm wondering, if we compare the political function of humor, particularly in satire, to its possible function in political treaties, what could that possibly say about, how slavery is being conceptualized by these writers if they're taking this function of humor out of satire and putting it in texts that are, if they're political treaties, kind of meant to be read more, at least I would argue, more seriously, or as some type of prescriptive, diagnostic type of way of looking at the world.
Yeah, I think it's an important question. I would suggest that the Greeks were aware that comedy and satire and humour had a very profound psychological impact, and that it could be used in different fields, in different ways. So it's only half an answer, and maybe Krista would like to come back in on this, but I think there are connections between these things, and that there was an awareness that humour was, maybe not, I don't think there was quite the same sort of articulation of the psychological issues, if you will, but I think that there was an experience of how these things could work that meant you would use it in lots of different fields of life, that you could use it in a political context and a philosophical context and in comic drama and in myth, and that there aren't the same sort of divisions that we might think of today. That's very general. Kristen, you might want to add something to that more specifically.
I don't have anything at the moment, but I'm sure later on.
Was there something specific you were thinking of?
Nothing. Okay. It made me think back to my readings of Aristotle's Politics and how I never picked up a humorous tone. It could be my amateurish experience with the text, probably is, but in reading it as a serious political text, and especially because you were saying it has such a profound impact on even current legislation, current conceptions of slavery, natural slavery, etc. In reading it and not ever picking up that humorous tone, it just makes me think what other things, maybe there are things that I thought that he could be saying that he was not saying because I didn't take it as humorous, or so what could that be saying about how he even thinks about
Well, I think
slavery?
that's interesting what you're saying about your sort of earlier readings. And of course, Aristotle's treatises, they have a very strong sense of being educative, they're teaching, and of course the Greeks saw that you had to use humour in teaching. So I think that might be the way I'd want to approach this, not to have to change your readings, but just to reflect on what the original audience might have brought to it, and then in comparison with your ideas.
So I saw, yes, thank you, Jesse. I saw a hand there, and then back there, and then right here. So we're going to go to one.
Just directly connected to follow up. I'd still like to better understand the function of humor in this text in this regard. Like you, when I read that, and in all the receptions in the history of ideas and reconstructions of that, I never found that in there. However, if it is humor, what other function could it have than to ridicule the slave in such a way as to justify the institution, which is just what the text was about? justify, I mean, in the history of ideas, in the literature which I studied, the reception usually goes the way that the institution of slavery had become a bit precarious. You needed justifications, which was very unusual. You do not find many justifications of slavery because it was taken as an uncontested institution. Aristotle provided justifications. If humor plays a function, the function is to strengthen these justifications. Or
Can I clarify which text you were talking about there? Were you talking about you're talking about the politics?
about the
Yeah.
tools of the soul.
Right, okay. When Aristotle refers to the myths of Daedalus, Homer, moving tripods, he is tapping into a cultural dynamic, a set of myths and stories about Daedalus, which is very often been told in a comic way. There's also the argument that Daedalus might have been a common slave name. This is another possibility taken from Xenophon. So what I'm suggesting is that when we look at the images of Daedalus before Aristotle uses them, we see that there is a lot of comedy, a lot of myth involved. So that when Aristotle uses that, Hephaestus and Daedalus are both comic figures in myth. They are not always the serious figures that we tend to think of them as. So I think when Aristotle uses those, he is, in a teaching sense, trying to sort of make you think around the issues differently. He's being playful with you. Not that he's not giving you information, but that he gives it to you in a straightforward, a slave is an item of living property, and then he does it from a different angle and says, okay, well, let's think about this mythologically.
But this brings me to the same point.
Well, I think it could well be. I think he is trying to convey an image or an idea which he knows is conceptually difficult. And so he's doing it from as many angles as he can. So I think there, the humour is intended to be supporting his particular point. But I think that the more general point that Jesse was making about how humour works in political treatises, it can work in different ways. And again, this is the importance of close reading that I would suggest, rather than trying to generalise about the whole thing.
Okay, so then we'll go back there, and over here, and then to the front.
Yeah, I guess this is a little bit of an extension of this conversation, because what I was really struck by was how you were describing how his description of slavery both was about a kind of current institution, but also as a metaphor for kind of like other ways of thinking and talking about knowledge. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the function of metaphor, of using something like slavery as a metaphor for knowledge or ways of thought, and kind of like how then I was really struck by the metal statues and the enslaved bodies and these questions of agency. How do those sort of explorations feed back into thinking about metaphoric uses of these ideas, as well as literally kind of describing a political landscape?
I mean, I think the answer that I would give to start with is that we have to accept that Aristotle in many ways was writing against Plato. So what Plato did, Aristotle was sometimes trying to go one better, and sometimes trying to get rid of some of the things that he thought Plato was messing around with. And Plato has a lot more comedy, a lot more metaphor in it, in his expressions of philosophy. We have to get things like the image of the cave in Plato's Republic and so on. So I think when we get to Aristotle, the use of metaphor and myth is more limited. I think therefore it's more well chosen. So any reference, any sort of metaphor we get needs to be examined even more carefully in Aristotle than it is in Plato. So the fact that we get those two images together, the idea of the living slave and then the moving statues or the moving tripods, suggests to me that the Greeks didn't distinguish clearly in the way we might between this is logic and this is metaphor, or this is logic and this is myth, that there are much closer connections. But I think for the general point that you're making about where do metaphors go in terms of slavery and runaway slaves and so on, I would suggest that when we think about the lived experience of somebody at the time looking at a slave, they are going through a set of cognitive processes that are very, very different from anything that we have experience of today. And I don't pretend to be able to tell you exactly what those cognitive processes are, but I think that the effort to engage with those differences is valuable in itself. And I mean, this might be something that Hedda could say something about when we come to these festivals. How far are people seeing it as a ritual? We do this to reverse things for a day to please the gods. How far are they thinking of it as metaphorical? How far is it a psychological opening? I don't know, perhaps.
It's a very interesting question. It's impossible to answer. I think that probably there was one original meaning of the very strict reversal of roles. And you have other examples in Sparta of a strict reversal of male and female roles, and a lot of things that we have difficulties in really understanding today. But then there is an evolution of I mean, you have an already like Christmas. Today we give presents. It used to be something else a couple of hundred years ago. So you have an evolution of the meaning of the festival, the sense of the festival.
Yes. So you've got the evolution of festivals, but you've also got the evolution, of course, in the history of philosophy that Aristotle is working against Plato in so many ways.
So we're going to go here, then to the front, then to the middle there.
I find it a little bit dangerous comparing, while there are obviously common features, I find it a little bit dangerous comparing slavery in ancient times to chattel slavery, especially practiced in the Americas. Yes, in form, it looks somewhat similar, but totally different economic underpinnings still. Chattel slavery back in ancient times was strictly, it wasn't so much for commodity production as for subsistence level agriculture. They needed the slaves to provide enough labor to produce the food and stuff. In modern slavery, these were cash crops. They weren't mainly for subsistence, while they might employ similar techniques of ideology to justify the existence of slavery in both epochs. It was a totally new experience. Modern racism didn't actually come about until the discovery of America, with the need to enslave people because of a mass labor shortage in America. So they needed an ideology to justify the mass uprooting of millions of people from the African continent to work those fields, and the slave trade itself was used to industrialize the northern part of the United States, where the textile mills were built. So it's dangerous to go too far in making say, well, it's all the same, because that's really taking the class nature of history.
I think that was the point we were trying to make, that it's dangerous to have these comparanda, that we need to pay much more close attention to the individual details, as you say, the historical factors and so on. Yeah.
Right.
And really to put them in the context of their societies. But you did have like slaves in the silver mines for silver mines of Athens. So
yes,
chattel
there were
slavery
exceptions.
To the front.
I actually had a question for you, because your quote by Frederick Douglass in that the slave festivals were kind of enacted by their masters in
So I was just wondering, like, have you made comparisons to like Carnival, like in the Caribbean and in like Latin and Afro-Caribbean communities?
Thank you. This is the comparison that has been done by Henk Basnel. So it tends to take all festivals or reversal into one group. But as for the Dora communities, I see that there is a clear difference between festivals and reversal and the ones that are more broadly holidays, including a reverse element.
Okay. So I was just wondering, just because like the way that they were established, I guess, is like so vastly different. Like one was like really put in place to keep them down, and one was like a sort of rebellion and like a joyful one.
Yeah, this was really what I was trying to say, that there is a tendency to paint everything with a very broad brush, but that, one should really take it.
Catherine Powell?
Yeah, I actually wondered, I can see the difference between Carnival and similar Pinkster and so on, and the Darn festivals. I wonder, does any of the very specific ritualistic aspect of what you're looking at, have you considered it in comparison with the Seder, which is absolutely a festival of escape from slavery, and actually what really triggered my thought was the one of the 4 questions of a Passover Seder is, why is this night different from all other nights? Tonight we recline. Some nights most nights we eat sitting up, and tonight we recline, and of course everybody reads this in a modern context and says, no we don't, we're around the table. This makes no sense. But that very specific thing, which is absolutely dates to that essentially Jews were extremely Romanized, and so they're dealing with the Roman culture, which is in turn pulling from the Greek. I don't know if anyone has done anything with that, but I wondered if that is a possibility.
But I know, thank you so much.
So,
yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, a question for Emmett Griffin. So I'm wondering, because I feel like there's another section to your paper that we didn't quite get to. So how does it change our thought about artificial intelligence if we begin in middle and myth? And that's our kind of model of slavery, rather than what I'd say comes out of American chattel slavery, which would be flesh, bodies, rape, and so forth, and everything that kind of goes with that. So basically, you're starting from someplace else to get us someplace else with artificial intelligence. Do you have a sense of where that's going to be?
Yes, I mean, ultimately, my feeling on this is that the Greeks had such a complex cultural framework around slavery that they were able to use it not just to talk about slavery, but to talk about human rights, to talk about creation. And that the complexity of that is, the complexity should be our model, rather than looking simply at Aristotle and saying, oh well, we've got Aristotle's natural theory and we work with that. We should in fact be looking at the whole complex, and that when we then come to talk about modern institutions, particularly the newest institutions with the creation of artificial intelligence, we need to be very aware of the complexity there. And the specific thing that I'm really interested in is with the language of slavery. If you compare intellectual knowledge to a metal sculpture, and then you compare a metal sculpture to a runaway slave, that is tying ideas together that we don't always do today. Now, some people are starting to work on that. Obviously, Kirky's idea about artificial intelligence defining legal personhood, it's going in that direction. But I think that some of the dangers we find, where you can talk about slaving computers and who owns a robot, can you own knowledge? I mean, ultimately, if you go to the Skynet model with, sentience and, come with me if you want to live and all of this, I think you can get caught up in small areas where, in fact, we should be looking at bigger cultural frameworks. So that would be sort of the argument of where this paper will fit into a broader debate. But I'm very much open to suggestions for other strands to pull from this.